Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. Somewhat a breaking news, live on the scene, I guess, episode on this Thursday afternoon. We are coming to you shortly from leaving the Georgia practice field. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. We've got the whole crew, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, with us on this Thursday, and a lot to get into because Georgia has started fall camp. Ben and I were able to go out on Thursday afternoon, brave the heat. I think it was like 93 with a heat index of like 101, but a lot of good stuff, not only from what we got to see in about 15 minutes of practice, but also what we heard from Kirby Smart and a few of the players beforehand. Ben, have you been able to cool off in about the 20, 30 minutes since I last saw you?
I definitely am still sitting in the sweat that I was experiencing from our very brief window that we got at practice. I definitely felt the heat. Before you all got over there, I'd gotten there a little early. I was trying to post up as much in the shade as I could until we had to get out there in the heat. But great, just so good. Such a good feeling being back out at a football practice. Anytime that it really hits you when you get out to that first football practice of the year and you're just like, wow, it's already here. I can't believe August 1 has finally arrived. And it definitely, it felt like football out there at Buttsmere today.
Yeah, I wish I had $1 for every time I said we're so back as we were getting ready to go out there to practice. Kipp, you didn't have a chance to go out there with us. I hate that you missed standing out there and marking off attendance and seeing what the special teams look like. But how's everything holding down on your side of town?
I broke a sweat just hearing you guys talk about it. As soon as I saw that we're back to 93 degrees after the wettest July of, I guess, our lifetime, basically, I did not feel guilty at all. Just sitting in the confines of my living room, trying to keep this bad boy as close to 68 degrees as possible. But again, let's give you another $1 because we're so back. This is it. That's why you get paid the big bucks to be in Athens, and I'm glad to have you guys as coworkers.
Well, let's jump into the big news from Thursday. Kirby Smart led off his press conference announcing that Ra Thomas has been dismissed from the program. I don't know that was necessarily a surprise given what had happened last week with his arrest, but that is a big blow for the Georgia receiving corps, given what he was capable of. Given the role he could have played this season. Kirby didn't say a lot, but I have loaded up some of the audio, some video for you guys watching this live. Here's just briefly what Kirby had to say on the Ra situation.
Had a chance to sit down and meet with him face to face Tuesday, which I think was really important, and let him know that he can no longer be a part of the football team. And he understands that, and we wish him nothing but the best moving forward.
Yeah, so like we said, not a ton, and I don't think that was a surprise to see that, it was pretty straightforward. And I thought it was a good idea for Kirby to do that from the jump. I mean, we had a lot of questions about that situation with Ra, but let's talk about what it means for Georgia. I spoke about this. I think it's going to be on CBS Sports HQ. It's a situation where I think Ra was going to contribute in this offense. I still think that even if Ra was here, that Colby Young might have surpassed him. Colby had such a big spring, although, the fact Ra did have a year under his belt in this offense certainly would have helped. I think the biggest thing when you look at this passing game without Ra is you have a lot of questions about Georgia's depth now. We were talking about this before we started recording. I think Georgia's only got like 10 scholarship receivers. And I know that's, it sounds like a decent chunk, but you get a few guys banged up and all of a sudden you've got real questions. And to me, obviously Colby Young benefits quite a great deal because I think he is for sure your starting X, but I'd be curious to see if they play Dylan Bell some there, which opens up opportunities for a guy like London Humphrey. So it's going to be a situation where, it is a real hit to Georgia's depth. Again, it was warranted. I thought that was very clearly the decision that needed to be made for Georgia. But it does stand out and it does hurt as far as the receivers go. Kipp, what did you make just of this departure and what it means for Georgia going forward?
Yeah, I mean, first off, Kirby said it himself. It was important for him to see Ra in person. And so for anyone wondering why would Kirby wait until now, obviously he had been in jail, so he needed the chance to see him face to face and tell him this is what needs to happen. Obviously, this is bigger than football. There are things that he needs to get together in his life, and this is the right move for both parties so that he can focus on his life and Georgia can focus on the guys it has on his roster. And Kirby said as much. Multiple offenses. He said this at SEC Media Days. You're not going to play for the University of Georgia if you make mistakes more than once. These kind of mistakes. And so I think for Georgia, it is next man up, and this is why they got a guy like Colby Young. But even then, looking further than that, to the true freshman like Nitro Tuggle. He is now going to be asked to move up the depth chart now and potentially end up being, in the two deep when all is said and done, or at least in the rotation. You got Dylan Bell, you got Colby Young, but they're going to need someone to rotate in with those guys. And I think now this is an opportunity in fall camp for these younger guys to step up. Kirby Smart talks about creating, adversity in camp. This is definitely that situation now. You have this adversity in your wide receiver room. Who is going to step up and take on a larger role? Because, they're obviously going to need as many weapons as possible.
For sure. And it's good to point out with Nitro that he's a guy that fits that extra receiver spot. And, we'll see how he handles himself in fall camp. I imagine that's going to go a long way in determining how much he plays. But, Ben, what do you make of the situation with Rah-Rah gone, just what Georgia's got to do going forward?
The departure itself, not really surprising. I think it was only a matter of time, truly. And I think Kipp laid that out very clearly as to the importance from Kirby's standpoint that he wanted to deliver the news in person. And there were some situational obstacles that prevented that from happening as soon as it did, until it was able to. From a depth standpoint, I know, Jordan, you were the one that asked him about this at the press conference today. Like, what does this mean from a football standpoint for the roster going forward? And I thought he was pretty candid about how he felt about the top of the depth chart at wide receiver. Like, he even named off some guys that had been productive at Georgia, that had even a guy like Colby Young, he called out as someone that had done it elsewhere. And so I think he feels good about a core group of 4 wide receivers. And I think that he sent a similar message when he was talking about the defensive line, which I think we'll talk about a little bit more too, but that he feels good about the top of the depth chart. But when you start thinking about youth and inexperience and you start going down the depth chart a little bit, Georgia's going to need those guys to step up. He brought up multiple times, whether it was a question that he was asked or whether it was him just bringing up on his own, the fact that it could be a longer season this year than it has been in past years. And I think that he was thinking more and more about depth just because of, injuries that are going to come up at multiple positions throughout the year. And so I think what Georgia will be really focused on this year, they know, what Dylan Bell can do. They know what Colby Young can do. They know what Dom Lovett can do. I think that it's what does the rest of the group turn into over the next month leading up to that Clemson game that will sort of determine how confident Georgia feels in the room as a whole.
Ben, I'm so glad you mentioned Kirby talking about the receivers because I loaded up that clip. Let's listen to what he said. I asked essentially, now that Rah-Rah's gone, what do you make of the receiver room that's left? And that's what Kirby had to say.
That are pass catchers back. We've got a lot of guys that have played the Dylan Bell, Arian, Colby for another team's played. Dom's been very successful and got a lot of catches. So, we have depth at the top. I think we've got to find more guys that can contribute in that room. Maybe they haven't had their opportunity. Maybe they're talented and pick things up quickly. We have several guys that came in from the portal with Mike Jackson and London. So I'm looking forward to see the opportunity each one gets to grow and get better, and it really starts today. But I'm fired up about that group because we got a good group of protectors around them, a good quarterback to get them the ball, and a good group of tight ends.
Yeah, Ben did a good job of sort of outlining what he said and what he sort of went into, but I thought it was kind of notable that he pointed out, the tight ends are sort of a part of this puzzle as well, to not just say this is about the receivers. But yeah, to the point that both of you guys had made, this is an opportunity now for some of these younger guys. This is a chance for some of them to step up, to rise to the occasion, to understand what, that there is real opportunity ahead for them. So, yeah, I mean, I think it's a situation now where you lost a guy that you thought you were going to be able to count on, a veteran guy that, it's a shame when you look to his last season. He showed flashes of being a really, really productive receiver, has that foot injury. And, for all intents and purposes, that was basically the end of his Georgia career because of what has happened in the last week. But now you got to react and you got to respond, and we'll see what Georgia's able to do on that front. Well, let's talk about some of the other things that were discussed during the interviews before we wound up going out to practice. And one of the things that really raised my eyebrows was Kirby talking about Branson Robinson. This is a guy that, had a patellar tendon injury in fall camp last year. And, there were thoughts about, is this guy going to play this season? And how late in the season is he going to be able to suit up? He is participating in practice. It sounds like no limitations, although they are going to manage his workload. And, it was brought up, is this kind of surprising? And Kirby pointed out, which you'll hear in this clip in a second, that, it has almost been a year, but, Branson's made good progress, and it set him up to, where conceivably we could be talking about him by the end of August and going into September.
I don't know what the number of months is. It seems like it's almost a year because it happened preseason last year. So I think it's not a shock to me that he's able to start and go without limitations. But the load management is critical because you can't take someone who hasn't done everything and just throw them into everything. So we have to be smart about that. But it's certainly promising because I thought going into I forget what practice it was he got injured last year, but he was having a really good camp. He looked really good. And I remember thinking, golly, this guy was getting ready to, have a great season, great camp, and then he has to go back, and you forget the blitz pickups. You forget all the things that he missed out on that he didn't get a chance to do that he'll be doing now, and I know he's looking forward to it. We're excited to get him out there.
Ben, I don't know if you felt the same way I did, but it was sort of surreal seeing number 22 out there on the practice field today. But, it's a great story. Not only because Ben drafted him on his fall camp breakouts, but, to see that he may have a real opportunity this year. And I'm sure that it means a lot to him given everything he's been through.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little birdie let me know that it was possible he was going to get a little more run this fall than I was maybe expecting a couple of weeks ago. And that led to my Mr. Irrelevant pick in the breakout draft. But I think more than anything, I think anybody that was out there today was just excited to see 22. I mean, I think it's anytime you hear about injuries, and I think the significance of the injury is made pretty clear in that it has been over a year since he injured it. And there were still all of these questions about what his availability was going to be. The fact that he still got a load management sort of pitch count in some capacity. We weren't told exactly what that's going to look like, but he'll have some kind of load management throughout the course of the fall camp as well as into the year most likely. And so I just think that tells you how serious this injury was, that it's been as long as it has been, and there's still some of these concerns and there's still some of this caution going on. And I think that is why everyone is probably that sees 22 out there is happy to see him being able to go, and by the sound of things, no limitations, at least from what he can participate in, even though he might, take a step back in certain things that he does throughout the fall. Big for the running back room too. I mean, you talk about it for him and just the fact that he's had to overcome to get back to this point. But for the running back room, I think there's been questions about depth and what is the talent level of the room in comparison to some of the, Del McGee rooms. And I think that there's going to be a big microscope on Josh Crawford just because he is the first running backs coach that Kirby Smart's going to have other than Del McGee. And so I think people are going to be watching closely. What does this mean for the running back room? What does this mean for RBU? And I think that getting a body back like Branson Robinson's is huge. Now, how much is he able to contribute early in the season? That's still to be determined. How does his body respond throughout the course of this fall? nobody can give you that answer yet. But I think that just knowing that you've got Trevor Etienne, you've got Roderick Robinson, I think that's a powerful 1-2 punch that Georgia feels like it has. But if you can add a guy in like Branson Robinson that's been there and done that a little bit and had a great spring or fall last year before he got injured, and you look at a guy like Nate Frazier, who I thought looked really good out there. He's obviously brand new and doesn't probably know what the heck he's doing out there yet, but he looks like somebody that's going to be able to make an immediate impact. And so you start stacking some of those names together, the running back room looks a little bit better than maybe it would have felt like it did had this news about Branson Robinson not come out.
For sure. And you hit on the big thing to me is just what it could mean for the depth. And like you said, they're going to take it slow with him. And two, he's got to get confidence back in that leg. You hear of anyone, especially you hear it more so with knee injuries, but like being willing and not having to second guess or just, make natural moves and not have to worry, is my leg going to be okay? But, Kipp, what do you make of what this potentially could mean for Georgia's depth, knowing that, I asked Kirby about this today. They don't have a whole lot of experience behind Trevor Etienne. And, it remains to be seen what Branson's going to be able to do once we get to the start of the season. But the outlook is definitely a lot better than we expected at this point.
You're right. It's a huge unknown for this football team right now. I mean, the expectation we all put on Trevor Etienne was, as big as we've really had for a transfer at Georgia, to come in and basically be the RB1 at a school that's just had the production Georgia's had over the last 10, 15, 20 years, just overall as a program at that position. If we're talking about this running back rooms and, the Dell McGee's departure and Josh Crawford coming in, it's interesting because I think the room hasn't really been up to Georgia's standards, for being honest, as of late. So looking at recruiting and looking forward, to the next couple of classes, I think Josh is probably excited to kind of maybe restock that room. But looking at the guys they have right now, the fact that Cash Jones is probably going to be asked to play an important role, possibly against Clemson, says that they probably could use one of these guys stepping up. Nate Frazier looking explosive early on in camp would be huge. Roderick Robinson in year 2 obviously looks the part. But I think Branson Robinson was kind of that guy where, opposing defenses were probably just really worried about him being on the field, having to tackle him. He was the one that caused the most business decisions to be made. And so I think that him getting back and getting the confidence back will be huge for Georgia, because they want to be physical and they want to be able to rotate their backs in there and know that these guys are going to take a lot of big hits, but we have the depth and the talent to be able to do that. So if you're going to have Roderick Robinson out there, he's, going to take a lot of hits. You need a guy like Branson Robinson to be able to come in and push him for snaps, but also to be able to take the brunt of that. And also, I guess, as Kirby Smart said in his presser today, just talking about blitz pickup. I mean, how huge is that going to be for this team? Having another guy out there and having him get back into that's going to be huge for Georgia as far as their pass protection early on in the season.
Kirby had a lot of interesting things to say, which I don't think is surprising given, that this is the start of camp. But something else that caught my attention, and I've got this clip and we'll play it in a second, is Kirby talking about the defensive line. And it seems like every year he talks about how thin they are, but they're in a situation right now where Ty Ingram Dawkins is dealing with injury. Warren Brinson is dealing with injury. Jordan Hall is going to be out maybe until the start of the season, according to Kirby. But I thought that this was really interesting. Kirby talking about defensive line and what they're going to have to do during fall camp. Let's take a listen.
I'm pleased with where they are in terms of Warren's dealing with a little nagging injury that he's dealt with, and he'll push through that. And us has been great. We got to get the young guys ready to play. You never have enough defensive linemen. So just from the jump street, we got some big bodies in that room, but we got some inexperienced big bodies. So it's really important that we establish depth, that we're looking at a potentially longer season. And we have, I want to say it's 4 or maybe 5 new guys, meaning first year with us, because that includes a portal transfer and 4 high school guys that are 300 pounds or greater that haven't played a snap for us. and they will provide our depth in that room. That when guys get injured at that position, they got to be able to step in and play. And that's an area that we got to continue to develop and grow. I mean, everybody does. Nobody has enough of them.
I thought it was really interesting him talking about the young guys, and they're in a position where they're going to have some of those guys step up. And Christian Miller is a guy that I think Kipp was he one of your draftees in the fall breakouts. He was a guy running with Nazir Stackhouse, and I think that might have been the case even outside of these injuries. But they are very thin right now at defensive line, and I've talked about the defensive line and the interior specifically being my biggest concern. And, Kipp, you factor in now that you've got less options than we thought they would. This is going to be an area of this team to pay attention to over this next month.
Yeah, they need guys to step up there for sure. I mean, that's the position again. They're going to go as far as that defensive line depth takes them, and they need playmakers there. It's the position where you saw the biggest drop-off from their championship run, and it impacted them in the SEC championship loss to Alabama. So obviously they need an increase in production there, but they got to know that their second and third string guys are ready to come in and play at a high level as well. So it's not, again, Christian Miller was one of my breakout guys. He's my bold prediction as a starter. I didn't have that, by default due to injury. I thought that, this is it. The time is now for him because he has that ability to be a playmaker. But just, we also Jamal Jarrett, another breakout draft pick. It's a huge offseason for him, and he's got to step up as well and be able to provide them with high level play at the nose tackle position. And if Brinson is, now we got to talk about the possibility of him not being able to go for Clemson. Him and Jordan Hall, you might be asking, guys that are third and fourth on your offseason depth chart to step into a starting role. So if you're going out there and starting Nazir Stackhouse and Christian Miller, all of a sudden now Jamal Jarrett and maybe Xavier Cloud's moving, he's playing inside at defensive tackle at this point. You got Ty Dawkins at defensive end, him and Gabe Harris, you're fine there. But you're going to be asking some guys that have not played important snaps for you to step into some big-time roles right from the start. So this is going to be a huge camp for this defensive line. So I could see why Kirby Smart made it a point to talk about these young guys. They have to grow up real quick.
Yeah, they really have no choice. Ben, what did you make of what Kirby had to say about the defensive line and just the situation that the Bulldogs find themselves in?
Well, it sounds to me like if Kirby could, he would sign 85 defensive linemen, and that would be his full roster. He said, we never have enough. Nobody's ever has enough. It was like, it sounded like he was, I don't want to say on his soapbox, but he was definitely like not upset, but pointing out that the defensive line has not enough bodies. He wants more guys there. He always feels like you can use more depth. And then I think he was like, but this is a problem that everybody deals with. Like if the University of Georgia is dealing with this problem, then just about everybody's dealing with this problem. That said, it is a concern. I think that if you were to raise concerns about where Georgia's defensive shortcomings were last year, it probably would have been just creating that pressure up front, especially that interior defensive line. I think that we've talked about it a bunch, that Nas Stackhouse was probably asked to play the nose more than he should have been asked to play the nose, because he could have been able to do some other things if they had that pure nose. But it sounds to me like he's probably going to have to do a lot of that again, at least early in the season, just given with who's going to be able to get run during fall camp. Now, I do think that the young bodies, you talk about Jaw Jarrett, you talk about Nasir Johnson, you talk about Xavier McLeod, I think is probably, because he's been there, done that more than these other young guys has, he's probably the most likely to be able to crack into that rotation. But I think it's something we're going to find out. I think that Georgia coaches probably don't even know quite yet without these next 2 to 3 weeks of sample size to say who is it that they can really rely on going into that Clemson game if Brinson and Jordan Hall aren't able to be full go.
We also had a chance to talk to players, Dalen Everett, Dan Jackson, Arian Smith, Tate Ratledge. Good stuff from them, and I'm going to have stories from those interviews the next few days. I did want to play this clip of Tate Ratledge. I thought this was great perspective. He was asked essentially, as an older guy, as a guy who has, been through this a time or two, when you get to fall camp, are you dreading it? Are you excited? And I thought that Tate gave a good answer talking about as you get older, kind of cherishing stuff like this and understanding that enjoy it while you've got it, and enjoy the chance to go play football, because you don't want to take it for granted.
It's the fun part of what we do. We're not out there running. We're not out there swinging weight around. It's football. We can go play football. That's what we're here for. It's what we do. And I think that's something to look forward to every year. And kind of as you get older, you kind of learn that. And I think these younger guys are going to figure that out at some point. And it took me some time to figure that out.
I really enjoyed listening to Tate. He also gave a good answer earlier in that interview about how he's grown since the last time he played Clemson, which, if you guys remember, he played about 2 snaps, got hurt, and then, was on the rehab basically for the next year. And he talked about, how quickly it can be taken away from you and not taking it for granted. And Ben, I'll just start with you. I mean, to hear a veteran kind of talk about that, and it's not a fun setup. We came off of the field, we were just standing there watching, and it was hot. But, guys like Tate Ratledge understand what that moment means, and, they do what they can to make the most of it.
Well, my first take before I answer your question, has he always been tatted up like that on his right arm? Or has he been hanging out with Carson a little too much, perhaps?
He's definitely added some tattoos, and Dog Nation's Connor Riley asked him about them. I would encourage people. We have the video of that full interview, and he sort of explained what his tattoos meant. I know there's one that is from his hometown of Rome. He's got a tattoo for Devin Willock, which was really cool. But yeah, no, that is some of those tattoos are new since the last time we saw Tate.
Good artwork. It looks good. I hadn't even noticed that yet. So shout out Tate for that. I think there's a reason why Georgia makes such a significant effort to bring certain senior leaders back. You can tell every offseason there's certain guys that Georgia felt like they needed to maybe go a little above and beyond to make sure that they hold on to them. And I think this goes back to Sony and Chubb. That's when it really started for Georgia, the retention of big-time senior leaders. And I think that Tate showed in his interview today, and the way that he's able to just kind of give guidance of what life is like when you're a young person at Georgia, what it becomes. He's been through a lot of hot falls at Georgia, and this one might be as hot as any of them. It certainly felt like there was more water usage going on while we were out at practice today than I'm typically accustomed to. But I think that's my biggest takeaway from everything that we saw from Tate is just, there's a reason why Georgia wanted him to come back as badly as they did. You need that type of leader who's been around, who's been on championship teams, who's been on teams that have suffered some of the heartbreak, that you can really thrust into that role. And Georgia had a great set of leaders last season that departed. And I think that Kirby was even asked about that today, who kind of is going to step into that leadership role, or what have you seen from those leadership types? And I think there's no question about it that Tate Ratledge is going to be somebody that everybody on the team leans on when things get tough during the 2024 season.
Kipp, what did you make of what Tate had to say?
Old man Tate. I just think it's crazy. He's the elder statesman in the room, him along with Xavier Truss. But I think Tate's kind of been that vocal presence since he got there to Georgia. So, for Kirby, it's all about, pushing these guys. You're vocal. Some guys lead by example. Carson Beck's one of those guys, but Tate's vocal. And so that's, Kirby Smart wants to weaponize that and put it to use to get this offense going. You have a lot of guys that were in your pass catching room who are now in the NFL. What's the identity going to be of this offense now? It's going to be up front, and Xavier Truss, they're going to be the guys who are going to be asked to take these guys to the next level. You've got a transfer running back. Again, it's going to be on Tate. He is the guy that is in this room who's going to take them to the next level in fall camp. And so if Kirby and Stacey Searles are pushing anyone as hard as they can, it's going to be Tate, because I think it's going to have a trickle down effect, and he's going to make sure that, especially in his position room, that there are no slackers, because he knows he's been to the mountaintop. He knows what it's like to win it all, but he also knows how disappointing last season was. And so now, if anyone's going to have, I guess, the chip on their shoulder and the motivation to show that, they can get back, it's got to be Tate.
We're going to take a quick break, come back, and Ben and I will talk about what we got to see out on the practice field. I would encourage everyone who is watching this live, everyone who is listening, to go to dogs247.com. So far, we got a practice report and a photo gallery up from Thursday's practice. Once we get done recording this, I will also have a VIP observation story up. But 15 minutes out there, got a chance to walk around, see some of the offense, see some of the defense. Ben, I'll start with you. What stood out from what you got to see? What did you make, what really caught your attention of what we got to be out there and watch?
Well, the first thing, Kirby Smart is always the first thing that stands out to me whenever I go to these practices. And I think we had a moment, Jordan, when we were leaving where Kirby is just in his element. You put him on that microphone and there's football people around and there's nobody more in their element than Kirby Smart is. But I think as we were leaving, I saw a few NFL scouts while I was out there. I think the Giants, Dolphins, Packers, Chiefs. I'm sure that there were some others that I didn't see while I was out there. But Kirby was on the mic and they were doing punt work. And he was just preaching on the microphone about 11 and 6, talking about Arian Smith and Dom Lovett, basically saying they're the greatest gunners. I think his wording might have been the greatest gunners ever created or something along those lines, basically suggesting that he's got these wheels at receiver that he's putting out on gunners on punt team. And he was saying over and over on the mic, our best players are on punt team. He said 24, 11, 6, 4, was just like calling out specific numbers saying Georgia's best players play on special teams. But he specifically made a call out to NFL scouts. He said, NFL guys watching 11 and 6, 11 and 6. And he harped on it multiple times. And so I don't know why I found that to just be the funniest, most fascinating part of the practice, that he's over here coaching his guys. It's his first day of camp, but he knows he's got some NFL folks in the building, and any chance that he can get to sell his guys in a football way that he thinks is right and that he believes in, he's going to take the opportunity to do that. So honestly, that was probably the last, 20 seconds that we were out at practice today, but that was probably my number one takeaway from the entire thing, which I know had nothing to do with the Georgia football side of things whatsoever, but I did find it interesting.
Yeah, Arian Smith and Dom Lovett. And he pointed out these guys, they didn't allow a single return last season, which is true, which is still absurd. But yeah, he pointed out that the best players, go out there and play on special teams. Some of the stuff that I saw, and like I said, I'll have a VIP observation story. I'll go back through my notes. Saw a little bit of Jaden Rashada. I think that he's still kind of working through it. I didn't think that was his best that I got to see while we were out there. We mentioned Branson Robinson. Good to see him out there. Didn't seem limited. Smile Munden, I walked over there and watched just for a little bit during individual drills. No black non-contact jersey, was out there. Looked like he was going, which is important, as he gets ready for the start of the season. Watch the tight ends. I think Ben Urasek fits in very well. Another big tight end. I mean, he definitely looked the part. And he was the third tight end up behind Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky. So he's going to have to earn it, which I don't think is a surprise by any means. Watched a little bit of Michael Williams. When I was over there, he was with the outside linebackers. I don't think that was a surprise. We're going to continue to see him cross-training. Got to see some good stuff with Chidera Uzo-Doribe coaching up the outside linebackers, working with those guys, trying to get them ready to go. Safety, Malachi Starks and Dan Jackson were the first two up. And then you had KJ Bolden, and I can't remember who ran with KJ, but they were the next ones up. So a lot of intrigue. Offensive line, same line that we've seen going back to the spring. Ernest Green, Dylan Fairchild, Jared Wilson, Tate Ratledge, and Xavier Truss. So nothing very surprising there. Receivers, watched them for a while. Obviously, with the Ra Thomas news, want to see how they were looking. Dylan Bell had a tough drop early on, but seemed like he bounced back well. James Coley was really coaching the guys up. really riding those guys, trying to get the most out of them, which I don't think was a surprise. It was. I thought a productive first day. I thought that the special teams piece of it was definitely what really caught my attention, and no surprise either. Kirby riding those guys on, come on, let's go. Calling out guys saying they're walking too slow. We got to pick it up. Another day in Athens, and the language got ratcheted up a little bit by the time I was walking to my car getting ready to go home, which was no surprise. But a lot of good stuff, and like I said, I'll have some more details once we get that observation story. Kipp, has anything stood out to you just from the practice report, some of the stuff me and Ben hit on?
Well, I actually have a question for you guys, because I'm thinking back about this morning's presser from Kirby, and kind of, we harp on the NCAA, and they seem to be stepping on rakes left and right every single change they make. But they did make one change this offseason that I think most people would agree was a long time coming and good for college football. And that was the one that, analysts and support staff can help is on the field coaches, so now instead of reporting a third level violation because one of your support staffers was on a special teams drill, you can actually just have everybody out there coaching college football, as it should be. And so even with there being 4 new on the field coaches, one familiar face, but also, you had several new guys out there. What was it like just seeing more coaches out there? Did you notice that there were additional guys helping out with drills, or did it just kind of look the same to you guys?
Well, I'll say Georgia always has a ton of people out there. Obviously, there's rules in place in terms of how much coaching what coaching can be done and what's allowed and what's not. So Georgia always had a lot of bodies out there. Kirby Smart is not short on employing people in that building. I did notice it a little bit when they were doing special teams, though, just because I think there were some first day, snafus going on. I know Josh Crawford was responsible for the return guys, and Anthony Evans was nowhere to be found at one point. So they had 2 or 3 support staffers running around with their head cut off, trying to find Anthony Evans because Kobe White was about to have to step in for him, which maybe gives you a little idea of who they're looking at for punt return guys as well. But I did notice that was the one time, at least that I saw, Jordan, you might've seen something differently, but that was at least the one time that I saw. I was like, all right, all hands are on deck. You can tell how the organization flows. And again, to your point, Kipp, there have been violations in the past, I'm sure, that they've had to report of guys participating in some practices and things like that, because the line was too fine in terms of what guys were allowed to do and not allowed to do with as many of those people out there at practice. So finally some common sense out there so that coaches can actually just coach,
Yeah, I didn't think it was dramatic with what you could see, because there were usually, coaches around. It was just what they were able to do. And I think the special teams was the point where you could kind of see, and you saw some new faces or people you weren't familiar with, shouting to the sideline, trying to get whoever was needed out there. And, other than that, I saw Will Muschamp back there working with the safeties and nickel, which he was, still.
Did we lose Jordan? That's okay.
Yeah.
I can
change by then, and saw Prather Hudson. Let's see. Am I back?
You're back. We got you.
I think you're back.
Yeah, I don't know what that was, but I'm not sure if Muschamp. He had done some stuff in the spring. I don't think anything had changed before then. But he was out there working with the safeties and nickel, and saw Prather Hudson, who I know he's an analyst. He was running some routes with the I'm trying to remember, I believe that was the cornerbacks, trying to test those guys. So I thought on the whole, it to me didn't look dramatic, but like you had said, Ben, we've seen a lot of guys hanging around in the past. It's just sort of.
I agree. Couldn't have said it better myself. And honestly, thinking about Prather Hudson out there testing guys with routes, to me, it kind of opens up a whole new opportunity for Georgia. Just former guys coming on and joining the staff that have a very specific skill set That's probably something I could see Kirby just adding analysts left and right who are, 4'2", 40 guys, or or 6'7", 320-pound offensive tackles, and just having them out there kind of testing the guys in the roster. So I just thought it was curious. Now, probably don't see it on day one, but it's probably going to help them out a lot down the road, just having these guys actually able to help out with drills and not get in trouble, instead of just kind of holding a clipboard and running errands for the coaching staff.
Also, what a scheme by Kirby Smart to get Will Muschamp as a remote analyst, and then he just shows up to work every day, it seems like, and he's out there coaching the safeties like he never left. And then you've also just got, these two full-time, Travaris Robinson and Dante Williams, just all the energy in the world going crazy around there on the defensive backfield. I mean, being able to have all three of those guys essentially as DB coaches, kudos to Kirby Smart for figuring that one out.
Will's living the life, man. Tuesdays and Thursdays, he'll be locked in 2 days a week. I mean, if only, I feel like we would be at our best if we were only needed Tuesdays and Thursdays.
You can't tell me that Kirby didn't say, look, Will, just do this. You can go out there to practice, and you don't have to go to a 2A football game every Friday night. You just get to come out to practice. You cannot tell me that was not the sell that Kirby had, because like you said, it's a pretty sweet deal for Will Muschamp.
It's like, for some reason, at one point I almost forgot that he had gone off the field, and then you spend all this time talking to recruits and things like that about T-Rob and Dante and all that it's like, okay, then I almost forget that Will Muschamp's around. Then I show up to practice and he's just there like he never left. I mean, it's funny.
Chris Tittle asked, how did the tight ends look? Ben, I don't know if you got to see much of them. I watched just very briefly at the beginning. Todd Hartley was pushing those guys through some drills. Looked good from what little I got to see. I saw a fumble recovery drill, and then they were kind of working through a drill where they were just kind of, having fast feet going through a line. Oscar Delp was first up. Lawson Lucky, Ben Urasek. I think I'd mentioned that earlier. Not surprising. Ben's just getting settled in, and he's going to have to prove himself. Did you have anything you get to see from the tight ends?
Well, no, I mean, he's clearly a fluid pass catcher. I mean, the first drill that I was going through, I think Oscar and Lawson both went through, and Hartley was being a little bit critical of, what they had gone through. And then Urasek came through and he said, there it is. That's what I'm looking for everybody to do. So clearly already, a fan favorite with his own position coach. This was my first time getting to see him in person. I did feel like it looked as though Oscar and Lawson have been through Georgia's strength and conditioning program, and it looks like Ben Urasek has been at Stanford for a couple of years, and that's not meant to be a complete knock on Stanford. It looks like they're guys that have been working with Scott Sinclair for a while, and Ben Urasek's just now getting in with him. So I don't think that that's why Georgia brought him in. They weren't bringing him in because he's some kind of physical freak of nature. They brought him in because he's going to catch a lot of passes. He's going to be a weapon in the receiving game. He's a solid all-around tight end that has a lot of NFL high draft stock as well. And so I think that the tight end room is going to be one of the strengths of this offense this year. And the more that we've talked about the wide receiver room and some of the maybe lack of depth outside of the top heaviness of the wide receiver room, I think that's why Kirby Smart is thinking of these tight ends as receivers, as he should, because even though you lose Darnell Washington and Brock Bowers back-to-back years, it's not a tight end room that is going to be emptying anytime soon.
All right, we don't know when we're going to get to watch practice again. I imagine our next interviews are going to be on Tuesday. But just sort of looking from day one on, I'll start with you, Ben. What are you most interested in hearing? What is it about this team that you want to hear as we really get fall camp rolling?
Well, not to sound like a broken record, but I think it's going to be what names on the defensive line are actually making an impact. I mean, I think that we've brought up Jaw Jarrett's name a lot, and I think that the reason why is not because there's any intentional pressure being placed on him or that there's this massive expectation of what he should be able to have accomplished already up to this point. But I think Georgia needs somebody with that body type to step up, and he's been around the longest. And so I think if he's a name that people start saying, all right, he's put a couple of good practices together, I think that's going to be a really important sign for Georgia. And it doesn't just have to be Jaw Jarrett. I'm not just putting the whole onus on him, but I just think, Kirby mentioned the 4 incoming names, 300 plus. 1 or 2 of those names, I think, is going to have to make some waves over the next 3 weeks, because maybe you're not asking him to be a standout against Clemson, but by the time you're going to Tuscaloosa, you probably are needing at least one or two of those guys to be getting some run, on this defensive line. And so I know we've talked about it a bunch all the way throughout this podcast, but I do think Georgia's offense is going to operate smoothly this season. It did last season. It has for previous seasons. I think it's only going to be more so this year. I think you look at the defensive back room, there might be some questions because at that second safety spot alongside Malachi, because, KJ Bolden might be getting thrust into that role as a true freshman. So there might be some questions there, but the linebacking core is deep and talented. I really think that if you look at one question mark on this team, it's not that is this defensive line capable of being good. I think that everybody looks at this defensive line and knows that when you look nationally, this defensive line is going to be good compared to almost any other program. I think that there's a standard at Georgia because of what was set forth in 2021 and 2022, that Georgia is desperate to find an elite defensive line again. And I think that's the question that we don't know yet. We don't know if it's going to be elite, and if it is elite, who is it going to be that contributed to make it elite? And I think that that's, to me, the next week, 2 weeks, we're really going to start to find out whether there are people stepping up in that room or not.
Kipp, what about you? What are you looking to see and wanting to hear about this team going forward in fall camp?
Well, I guess first off, since we kind of, it's tough to hear everyone's name on day one because you only get to watch a little bit of practice, but do we know for sure Gunnar Stockton's going to be QB2? So do we know that for sure? Does he look like he's QB2? This is, he's had time in the program now. He needs to look, I guess, more prepared and sharper than Jaden Rashada throughout camp. He needs to show I've been here longer. I'm putting this, time in the playbook to use, and setting up for that spring battle. Sure. But I'm talking about this season. How often do you go through the season with QB1, healthy the entire way? I mean, Georgia's pass protection has allowed them to be, I'm not going to say lucky, but they've benefited from great pass protection the last couple of years and have had steady production at that position. But I mean, again, you just never know. So you really want to see that you have, a QB2 ready to step in if he's needed and play at a high level. And so I think that's one thing you just want to hear, that either Gunnar is thriving or Gunnar and Jaden Rashada, like they're pushing each other, along with Ryan Puglisi. But again, those two guys need to really show they can be dependent upon it, because they might be asked to, at any point this season if Georgia is making a playoff run. And then the other thing, this is kind of the trickle-down effect. You're banged up on the defensive line. I want to see either from the Havoc package that we saw last season, where you basically had 3 pass rushers on the field at the same time, or just in practice, on a daily basis. I want to see Michael Williams in this new position, making life, hell for the offensive line. Damon Wilson in year 2, showing, he's bigger, he's stronger, he's explosive. Can he be the guy that we saw coming out of high school, 5-star edge rusher? And then again, Jalen Walker, don't take him off the field. Find a way to use him as much as you can. Those 3 guys need to be harassing your quarterbacks. Because if you're banged up on the defensive line, you're going to ask even more from these guys as far as creating havoc plays and created negative yardage plays. So those 3 guys really, you want to hear that they are making life very difficult for the offense in practice heading into, throughout fall camp.
For me, it is something we talked about earlier in this episode, but it's running back behind Trevor Etienne. And it really seems like at this point, that competition for that second spot is Roderick Robinson, who's probably got the lead. He's the older of the 2 guys, and Nate Frazier. So let's see how these running backs show up. Let's see what they're able to do. And let's see if Branson Robinson's able to, put himself in a position where his name comes up there. And again, we don't know what his workload's going to be, but we started this episode talking about receiver, and I do think it's fair to wonder about the depth there, but I still feel good about that sort of top, echelon of receivers, the Dominic Lovett, the Dylan Bell, the Colby Young. And then, you hope that someone between Arian Smith and London Humphreys or those freshmen or Anthony Evans kind of break through as well. I think you're okay there. Running back, I really need to see it behind Trevor Etienne. I think Roderick Robinson's capable, and I do think that in time Nate Frazier can contribute. But we're looking for thunder and lightning, just like we're getting in Athens right now. You need to see someone break through and join Trevor Etienne, and we'll see if someone's able to do it. All right, guys, we're going to wrap it up there. I do want to make sure and tell everyone who is watching, we still have a 60% off sale over at Dogs 24/7. Hey, sign up as you're listening right now. And in about 20 or 30 minutes from when we're recording this, I will have a VIP observations, a little bit more in depth than the practice report I had posted earlier Thursday afternoon. But make sure and go sign up. There's a lot of good recruiting intel from Ben and Kipp, and we'll have a lot of good team coverage over these next few days. Be sure to go to Dogs 24/7 on YouTube. Make sure and subscribe there. We've got all the interviews from Thursday, Kirby Smart and players, and we will have more going forward. I think next week we'll probably get the coordinator, so there will be video there. Also, go subscribe to this podcast, Junkyard Dawgcast, wherever you get your podcasts, and go check out Dogs 24/7 on TikTok. We've had some good content, both some stand-up stuff, as well as some clips from this podcast. So we're going to wrap it up right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.